Hello everyone, and welcome back to QuietMaghrebCrimes. I want to take a quick moment to thank each and every one of you for taking the time out of your day to sit down, unwind, and listen. Wherever you are tuning in from right now, whether you are sitting in your living room, commuting home, lying down in bed, or just wrapping up a long day, go ahead and take a deep breath, lower the volume to a soft, comfortable level, dim your lights, turn off the background noise, and just let yourself sink into the cushion. Tonight, we are taking a trip back in time, journeying into the quiet, sun-baked countryside and winding city streets of Morocco, into cases that spent months shrouded in complete obscurity, mysteries that seemed entirely unsolvable until tiny, overlooked human errors pulled back the curtain. So stretch out, get as comfortable as you can, and let us wander into our first story. Our first case takes us back to the year 2001, to the rural outskirts surrounding the town of Ben Ahmed. It was a warm, bright afternoon, right around 12:30 in the afternoon. The harvest season had just ended, leaving behind wide, open stretches of desolate agricultural farmland, vast, yellow fields lying completely still under the mid-day sun. On this particular afternoon, a local farmer and his wife were driving their horse-drawn cart out across the open fields. Everyday countryside folk doing what they always did after the harvest, collecting animal waste left behind by grazing livestock, which locals burned in traditional earthen ovens to bake bread. The horse was pulling the wooden cart slowly, stopping every few minutes as the husband loaded the dry scrap while his wife filled the back sacks. The vast, golden horizon stretched for miles, dead quiet, save for the faint sound of dry grass rustling under their boots. As the couple worked their way further into an isolated field, far off from the main paved road, the husband noticed something odd resting near a pile of dry wheat stalks. At first, from a distance, it looked like a bundle of discarded clothing, but as he took a few steps closer, his heart sank. Lying completely motionlessly on the dirt ground, wrapped tightly in her conservative traditional djellaba, was the lifeless body of a woman. Panicked, the couple immediately dropped their tools and hurried to contact the local gendarmerie. Within the hour, silver police vehicles pulled up along the dusty field edge. Crime scene tape flapped softly in the afternoon breeze, and investigators began securing the area. When the forensic team approached the body, they quickly recorded their initial findings. The victim was a well-built woman in her early 40s, dressed in a long, dark djellaba. Her traditional scarf, the cotton retza she used to cover her hair, was pulled far off her head, hanging loosely around the back of her neck, as if someone had grabbed her aggressively by the hair and yanked her backward. Her hair was unraveled, messy, and covered in dirt. When the medical examiner carefully turned the body, the scene became even more terrifying. Her neck had been slashed wide open, a clean, deep slice that severed her throat. But there was another bizarre, haunting detail marked across her body. Prominently printed across the fabric of her lower djellaba, clearly visible in the dry soil pressed onto her clothes, were deep, heavy tire tread marks. A vehicle, likely a small compact sedan, had intentionally driven straight over her lower body after she had been brought down. As the local gendarmes worked the perimeter, a few of the attending officers stared down at the victim's face and experienced a cold wave of recognition. They knew this woman. They did not recall her exact name on the spot, but they remembered her face clearly. She had walked straight into their precinct about 7 months prior. Looking back 7 months earlier, the victim had walked into the local police station, accompanied by her husband. She was visibly distressed, claiming that she had barely survived a terrifying robbery and attempted abduction. According to the statement she gave to the desk sergeant back then, she had been walking home around 5:30 or 6 in the evening after finishing a housekeeping job. As she stood near the edge of a quiet road waiting for a grand taxi, a small car carrying 3 men pulled up beside her. She claimed the men tried to force her into the back seat. She resisted, wrestling with them at the door, until one of the men violently shoved her to the dirt shoulder, leaving her with deep, painful scrapes across her knee, her elbow, and a massive, swollen scrape stretching along her right cheek up to her ear. However, the sharp officer taking down her complaint 7 months ago had noticed major inconsistencies. When he asked her how she fell after being pushed in the chest, simple physics dictated she should have fallen backward onto her head or shoulders. Yet, her clothes were scraped up at the knees, and her face looked like someone had been dragged face down across rough gravel. Furthermore, she claimed she could not describe the car, could not describe the 3 men, and there were 0 witnesses. The officers suspected back then that she had gotten into a violent domestic brawl or a personal fight with someone she was hiding, and brought her husband along to file a fake police report to cover up her whereabouts. Now, 7 months later, that same woman was lying dead in an open field, tied tightly at the wrists with thick wire that had cut deep into her skin. Detectives immediately opened a homicide investigation, pulling her identity files from the precinct records. Her name was established, and officers traveled directly to her family home. Arriving at around 1:30 in the afternoon, they knocked on the front door. 2 children answered, a 20-year-old daughter and her younger 12-year-old brother. When officers asked for their mother, the young daughter explained that her mother was not home. She told the police that 4 or 5 days ago, her parents had gotten into a sudden, heated argument late at night. Her mother had packed a small handbag, said she was going to stay at her grandparents' house in the countryside and walked out into the dark. The daughter added that her father was currently at work, working at a local concrete brick manufacturing yard. Detectives headed straight to the brick factory, locating the victim's husband at his work site. When questioned, the husband expressed genuine surprise, confirming that his wife had been missing for 4 days. He explained that on the night she left, around 7 or 8 in the evening, they had a petty argument over nothing. He told officers that after 21 years of marriage, his wife had grown increasingly unpredictable and difficult, complaining about small things, threatening to leave, and running off. He swore he did not follow her out that night, believing she had simply taken a late taxi to her parents' place. As she claimed, officers brought the husband down to the morgue to view the remains. The moment the sheet was pulled back, he broke down in tears, confirming without a doubt that the body was indeed his wife. Seeking to trace her final steps, detectives drove out 10 kilometers into the countryside to visit the victim's elderly parents. But when they arrived, her parents were stunned. They had not seen their daughter in weeks. She had never arrived at their house 4 days ago. Her family assumed she was safe at home with her husband and children. The puzzle was deepening. If the victim left her house 4 days prior, where had she been staying for those 4 missing days before her body was discarded in the field? A few days into the investigation, the medical examiner released the comprehensive autopsy report, bringing forth 2 massive, unexpected plot twists. First, forensic toxicology revealed a high concentration of alcohol in the victim's system. This shocked both her husband and her elderly parents, who swore on their lives that the victim was a devout, traditional woman who never drank alcohol. Second, the forensic pathologist noted that the victim had engaged in intimate relations shortly before her death. However, there were no defensive skin cells under her fingernails, no bruises on her arms, and 0 marks indicating a violent sexual assault. The examiner noted that the encounter was either entirely consensual or occurred under extreme, quiet intimidation where she offered no physical resistance. With no cell phone logs available in 2001 to track her movements, detectives hit a complete brick wall. The husband's DNA was sampled and sent off to the Central Forensic Laboratory. But when the results came back weeks later, the fluid sample recovered from the victim's body did not match the husband at all. He was completely cleared of physical involvement in that specific act. Over a month went by, 30 long days of dead and leads, silent phone lines, and agonizing frustration for the investigators. The case was rapidly going cold until an unexpected visitor walked into the local precinct. An elderly neighborhood woman, driven by quiet remorse and local gossip, had gone to visit the victim's grieving parents to offer her condolences. While sitting in their living room, she casually mentioned a detail she assumed the police already knew. She told the parents that a month before the murder, while she was away traveling, her daughter had observed the victim spending extended periods of time, including multiple consecutive nights, at the house of a married female neighbor down the street. Detectives immediately summoned this female neighbor for questioning. At first, the neighbor was hesitant, but under calm, steady interrogation, she unburdened herself. She admitted that years ago, she and the victim had worked together as day laborers in wealthy private villas, doing laundry and cleaning kitchens. Over time, they became close confidants. The neighbor confessed that 4 days before the murder, the victim arrived at her front door late at night, carrying a small handbag, crying that she had fought with her husband again and could not face her parents. The neighbor opened her home, letting the victim sleep in her spare room for 3 nights. During those 3 nights, the neighbor noticed the victim leaving the house every single evening around dusk, getting dressed up and slipping out into the dark. When the neighbor confronted her, warning her that as a married mother she was playing with fire, the victim brushed her off. She boasted that she was meeting up with a wealthy local lover, a man she affectionately referred to only as her sweetheart, who was giving her pocket money and buying her small pieces of jewelry. The neighbor admitted that on the 4th evening, the victim packed her small bag, mentioned she was meeting him again to get help buying a gold necklace, walked out the door and never returned. When detectives pressed for a name, the neighbor suddenly recalled a story the victim had told her 7 months prior. After that suspicious robbery report, the neighbor revealed that the victim's hidden lover was actually a local middle-aged farmer, a married father who owned agricultural land in the area. All 7 months ago, that farmer had picked the victim up in his small vehicle, intending to drive her out to a private gathering with 2 of his male friends and some other women. When the victim realized where they were going, she panicked, threw open the passenger door of the moving car, and tumbled onto the gravel road, resulting in the facial scrapes she had tried to blame on unknown abductors. Armed with this critical breakthrough, gendarmes immediately tracked down the farmer and brought him into custody. During interrogation, the farmer was surprisingly cooperative, admitting openly to the long-term affair. He confirmed that 7 months prior, she had indeed jumped from his moving car during an argument. He also freely admitted that on the night of the murder, he had picked her up around 5:30 in the evening. They drove out to a secluded spot, drank alcohol together in his car, and engaged in intimacy. He stated that afterward, he gave her around 700 dirhams to help her purchase a gold ring she had been admiring. However, the farmer swore on his life that he did not kill her. He claimed that around 8 o'clock that evening, he dropped her off at a dark road junction near her neighborhood, as she requested, so her family would not spot his car. He stated that as she stepped out of his car, she was waving down a local grand taxi to take her the rest of the way. He claimed he watched her walk toward a standing car, then put his vehicle in drive and left. Detectives were skeptical. Was this farmer telling the absolute truth, or was he spinning a clever, semi-honest narrative to cover up a brutal murder? To verify his story, officers began interviewing every grand taxi driver working the night shift along that quiet stretch of road. For hours, driver after driver shook their heads, until they sat down with an older, respected taxi veteran. The elderly taxi driver listened carefully to the dates and times, then leaned back and remembered the night clearly. He told detectives that around 8:30 that evening, he was driving his empty taxi home after wrapping up his shift. As he rounded a dark bend near the fields, he saw a woman standing by the roadside waving her hand. Pulled up right in front of her was a small red Renault sedan, and a man was standing outside the vehicle arguing with her. The taxi driver pulled over, thinking the woman was in danger. But as he stepped out, the man turned around, and the taxi driver recognized him instantly. It was the victim's actual husband. The taxi driver explained that he knew the husband well, as they lived in neighboring rural districts. The husband looked at the taxi driver and said, "Uncle, please. This is a private matter between me and my wife. Just let us handle it." The taxi driver, wanting no part in a marital squabble, told the woman to get back with her husband, climbed into his taxi, and drove away into the night. He admitted he had kept quiet out of fear of getting dragged into family problems. Oblivious to the fact that she had been killed, the puzzle pieces suddenly snapped together with terrifying clarity. Detectives immediately arrested the husband. Confronted with the taxi driver's eyewitness testimony, the husband's calm demeanor completely shattered. He broke down in the interrogation room, weeping as the horrific truth finally poured out. He confessed that on that fateful evening, he had borrowed his brother's red Renault sedan under the pretense of running errands. As he was driving along the dark rural road, he unexpectedly spotted his missing wife standing near the shoulder, smelling strongly of alcohol and carrying a fresh roll of cash. When he confronted her on the side of the road, she refused to get into the car, prompting the brief encounter with the passing taxi driver. Once the taxi drove away, the husband grabbed her violently, shoved her into the passenger seat, and drove off into the pitch-black, harvested fields. Deep inside the deserted farmland, miles away from any homes, he stopped the car and demanded to know where she had been for 4 days, who she had been drinking with, and where she got the money. An explosive argument erupted. In a fit of overwhelming rage and humiliation, the husband grabbed a heavy, sharp screwdriver from the car's repair kit. He stabbed her repeatedly in the chest and neck, driving the metal tool deep into her throat and twisting it viciously, ending her life in seconds. Terrified by what he had just done, he dragged her bleeding body out of the passenger seat and left her on the dirt ground. As he put the car in reverse to flee the scene, the vehicle's tires passed directly over her body in the dark, leaving the faint tread marks that would ultimately guide investigators back to the truth. He returned the car to his brother, washed his hands, and played the part of a grieving, clueless husband for over a month. The husband was formally charged with premeditated murder, processed through the judicial system, and sentenced to life imprisonment, bringing a solemn, tragic end to a secret life that unraveled in the quiet Moroccan fields. As the heavy silence settles over that countryside road, let us gently transition across time, moving forward 9 years into the year 2010, to another quiet neighborhood, where a completely different mystery was about to unfold. It was a cool, quiet evening in a modest suburban residential quarter, a peaceful community where single, family homes lined narrow dirt streets. The neighborhood was quiet, characterized by modest 1-story and 2-story houses, where everyone knew their neighbors by name. Living in one of these modest 2-story homes was a 52-year-old widowed woman. She was a kind, deeply pious woman who had lost her husband years prior. Left alone to raise her 3 children, 2 teenage daughters aged 14 and 16, and an 8-year-old little boy, she devoted every ounce of her energy to their education and well-being. The widow was comfortable financially, thanks to a remarkable act of love from her past. Years earlier, she had taken full, tender care of her late stepmother during a long, fatal illness, nursing her day and night without complaint. When her stepmother passed away, she rewarded the widow's devotion by leaving her a substantial rural land plot, along with a massive collection of heavy, vintage solid gold jewelry dating back to the 1970s and 80s. High-purity hand-carved gold belts, thick bangles, and traditional necklaces. The widow had eventually sold the land plot, using the funds to build the upper floor of her family house, pay off her debts, and keep a secure cash cushion in her home for her children's future. On this particular afternoon, around 5 o'clock, her two teenage daughters walked home from school together. They approached the front door of their home, reaching up to knock, expecting their mother to open the door with her usual warm welcome. But there was no answer. They knocked again, louder this time, but the house remained dead silent, assuming their mother had briefly stepped out to buy groceries. The girls sat down on the front step to wait. A next-door neighbor, a woman who lived just across the narrow street, spotted the girls sitting outside. She walked over and informed them that she had seen their mother just 20 minutes earlier, walking back from the local communal water spring, carrying bags of fresh vegetables. The neighbor pulled out her own mobile phone and dialed the widow's number. Inside the closed house, the faint, unmistakable sound of the mother's phone ringing echoed from behind the solid wooden front door. The phone rang and rang, but nobody picked up. An hour passed. The widow's 8-year-old son returned home from primary school. Joining his sisters on the curb, the neighbor's husband came outside, sensing that something was terribly wrong. Knowing the house had small ground floor security windows facing the alley, the neighbor brought over a small tool, carefully broke a single pane of glass on a side window, and lifted the tiny 8-year-old boy through the frame so he could unlock the front door from the inside all. The little boy dropped down into the dark living room, turned the brass handle, and pulled the heavy door open. What the neighbors and children stepped into was a scene of absolute horror. Lying face down in the center of the tiled ground floor entryway, surrounded by spilled plastic bags of fresh vegetables and fruit, was the widow. She was still wearing her outdoor jalaba and headscarf, completely motionlessly in a pool of blood. She had been stabbed frantically and brutally. Multiple deep defense wounds cut across her arms, a fatal plunge straight through her kidney from behind, and a heavy, direct strike to her heart. She had died instantly where she stood. Local police detectives and forensic technicians rushed to the scene, securing the perimeter. The investigation began with a thorough sweep of the property. Upstairs in the master bedroom, officers found the room completely ransacked. Dresser drawers had been yanked out and dumped on the bed. Steel lockboxes had been forced open, and the entirety of the widow's massive vintage gold jewelry collection, along with 16 million centimes in fresh, banderoled bank cash, was entirely gone. This was not a tragic accident or a personal dispute. It was a cold, calculated robbery, homicide. Forensic teams spent hours dusting the door handles, the window frames, and the wooden furniture for latent fingerprints, but the perpetrator had been careful. 0 usable prints were recovered. The medical examiner estimated the time of death to be precisely around 4:30 in the afternoon, right in the narrow window of time between her returning from the market and her daughters arriving home from school. For 40 long days, local police launched an intensive neighborhood sweep, interviewing dozens of local residents, petty criminals, and suspicious visitors. But the murder had occurred silently without a single scream heard by nearby neighbors. The case stalled, and heavy grief hung over the quiet neighborhood. Then, on the 41st day, a completely unexpected break surfaced in the most ordinary of places. A middle-aged man and his adult daughter walked directly into the central police station carrying a small, clear plastic shopping bag, inside of which was a brand new, unopened baby blanket package. The father explained that he owned a respected jewelry shop located in a busy commercial quarter, while his daughter operated a small home, goods and baby, clothing boutique right next door. His daughter stepped forward to give her statement. She explained that a young local woman, around 32 years old, had visited her boutique a couple of days earlier. The young woman had recently given birth to a baby boy and claimed that relatives had gifted her far too many heavy baby blankets. She asked the boutique owner if she could trade 6 brand new packaged baby blankets for practical infant clothing and onesies. The boutique owner agreed, took the blankets, and handed over the baby clothes. Later that afternoon, as the boutique owner was unpacking the blankets to display them on her shelves, She unzipped one of the thick, heavy plastic packaging sleeves. As she reached inside to fold the fabric, her hand struck something hard and heavy tucked deep between the folds of the blanket. She pulled it out and stood in complete shock. Hidden inside the lining of the baby blanket was an extraordinary piece of solid, heavy vintage gold jewelry, a thick, handcrafted traditional gold belt studded with antique red and yellow stone accents. Terrified and confused, she immediately ran next door to show her father. The jeweler took one look at the unique 1970s craftsmanship and color, and his blood ran cold. He recognized the piece instantly. Years earlier, the late widow and her stepmother had brought that exact gold belt into his shop to have it appraised. He knew the widow had been murdered 40 days prior, and he knew her missing gold had never been found. Detectives moved with lightning speed. They interviewed the boutique owner to trace the identity of the young mother who had brought in the blankets. The boutique owner did not know the woman's home address, but recalled seeing her chatting frequently with a local cosmetics vendor operating a small shop nearby. Officers brought the cosmetics vendor in for questioning. She identified the young mother immediately, giving police her name and her exact residential address. To the detectives' absolute shock, the address was located in the very same neighborhood as the murder victim, just a short walk down the exact same street. Police vehicles quietly surrounded the suspect's house. Officers knocked on the door, and the 32-year-old young mother opened it, holding her newborn baby in her arms. Detectives presented the gold belt and asked her to explain how it ended up hidden inside a baby blanket she had traded at the market. The young mother collapsed into tears, completely bewildered. She swore on her life that she had no idea the gold was inside the blanket. She explained that 2 months prior, after giving birth, she was short on space in her small bedroom. Her house was crowded. She was living with her parents, her husband, and her younger brother. Because her bedroom was tiny, she had stored several packaged baby gift blankets inside a plastic storage tower located in her younger brother's bedroom. Detectives immediately turned their attention to the younger brother, a 22-year-old unemployed man living in the house. Officers stepped into the brother's bedroom, searching the space thoroughly. Tucked hidden underneath the bottom plastic drawers of his storage unit, resting on a wooden base plate hidden beneath old shoes, officers discovered a thick plastic bag. Inside was 16 million centimes in crisp, uncirculated blue banknotes, along with the remainder of the late widow's massive vintage gold jewelry collection. The 22-year-old brother was tracked down to a nearby neighborhood cafe, arrested on the spot, and brought into the police station. Confronted with the recovered cash, the gold, and the testimony of his sister, the young man's hard exterior completely collapsed. Sitting in the interrogation room, he asked for a cigarette, took a deep, shaky breath, and confessed to the crime in meticulous detail. He explained that for years, he had felt deeply frustrated by his lack of money and his inability to build a future. He had dropped out of high school at 17 after a severe disciplinary dispute, spending 5 years wandering the streets, filled with quiet resentment. He harbored a desperate, obsessive desire to migrate to Europe, but lacked the financial means to pay human smugglers. Living just down the street from the widow, he had listened for months to local neighborhood gossip about her late stepmother's wealth, the land sale, and the heavy vintage gold kept inside her house. He knew the family's daily routine intimately. He knew when the teenage daughters left for school, when the little boy was in class, and when the widow walked to the communal water spring. On the afternoon of the murder, armed with a sharp, concealed hunting knife, he slipped into the quiet alley behind the widow's home. He watched her return from the spring, carrying her grocery bags. As she unlocked her front door and stepped inside, he sprinted up behind her, pushing his way into the entryway before she could latch the door. When the widow turned around in shock, recognizing him as her neighbor's son, he panicked. Fearful that she would scream and expose him to the street, he drew the knife and attacked her instantly, stabbing her repeatedly until she fell motionless onto the tiled floor. He ran upstairs, ransacked her bedroom, snatched the gold collection and the cash stash, and fled back to his house down the street. He hid the money and gold in his bedroom storage tower, entirely unaware that his sister would later grab one of the stored blanket packages to trade for baby clothes, unknowingly handing the ultimate evidence straight to the police. The 22-year-old neighbor was tried, convicted of aggravated premeditated murder and armed robbery, and sentenced to life imprisonment, closing a painful chapter for a shattered neighborhood. As the weight of that tragic story quietly settles, let us take another step forward in our narrative. Moving to our final case of the evening, a mystery buried deep within a secluded rural villa. The setting was a quiet, sprawling country property located on the far outer edges of a major metropolitan district. A beautiful, custom-built countryside villa surrounded by open farmland, tall perimeter walls, and fruit trees. It was a peaceful retreat built by a wealthy, highly successful 68-year-old building contractor. The contractor was a well-respected figure in his community, a hard-working, self-made man who had spent decades buying land, constructing residential buildings, and managing real estate projects. Though he was nearing 70, he still possessed a deep, tireless passion for his work. He lived primarily in a modern city apartment with his devoted wife, but kept his beloved rural villa as a weekend escape where he could tend to his trees and relax. On a clear Friday evening, right around 11 o'clock at night, the contractor's wife was sitting in their city apartment, growing increasingly anxious. Her husband had left early that morning, dressed sharply in his crisp white traditional Friday de jalaba. After attending afternoon prayers at the mosque, he had told her he was driving out to the rural villa to meet brief business associates to discuss a potential land deal. Around 8 o'clock that evening, when he had not returned for dinner, his wife had picked up her phone and called him. He answered promptly, telling her softly, "Haja, I am almost done here. I am currently sitting with some people. I will call you back as soon as we finish." That had been 3 hours ago. Since then, his wife had called his phone repeatedly, but every attempt went straight to voicemail or rang endlessly, without an answer. Uneasy, she dialed the personal cell phone of her husband's private chauffeur. The driver picked up immediately. The wife asked if he knew where her husband was. The chauffeur explained that he had driven the contractor out to the rural villa around 5 o'clock that afternoon. The contractor had instructed the driver to take the evening off, saying he had a private meeting scheduled at the villa and would call him later if he needed a ride back to the city. The driver added that he had not received any calls since. Determined to check on him, the wife asked the chauffeur to pick her up immediately. Around 11:30 at night, the chauffeur's car pulled up outside the dark, wrought iron gates of the rural villa. The property was completely still. The exterior security lights were on, illuminating the front courtyard, and lights were visible inside the second-story living room, but the main front gate and all entry doors were tightly locked from the inside. The chauffeur stepped up to the front gate, ringing the bell and knocking loudly. No one answered. Growing increasingly alarmed, the driver climbed over the outer perimeter wall, dropped down into the courtyard, and hurried to the main entrance. Finding the solid oak door locked, he used a heavy landscaping tool from the garden to force the lock open. Allowing the frantic wife to step inside, they hurried up the marble staircase toward the second-floor living room. The moment the chauffeur reached the top landing, he stopped dead in his tracks, turning around quickly to block the wife from advancing. Lying in the center of the living room floor, dressed in his white Friday jalaba, was the contractor. He was motionlessly in a thick pool of blood. Local gendarmerie forces arrived within 30 minutes, setting up floodlights and establishing a strict crime scene perimeter. Forensic technicians examined the body, recording an astonishing level of violence. The 68-year-old contractor had been stabbed over 20 times across his chest, throat, and back. The attack was focused entirely on his upper torso, indicating intense, focused rage from the assailant. Beside the body, resting quietly on a side table, was the victim's cell phone and his personal wallet, containing all his cash, credit cards, and identification. Nothing had been stolen. The villa showed zero signs of forced entry. No broken windows, no picked locks, suggesting the contractor had willingly unlocked the front door and invited his killer inside. However, as forensic investigators moved through the room, they detected a powerful, stinging chemical odor hanging heavy in the air. The room smelled intensely of concentrated household bleach and liquid detergent. Looking closely at the floor around the body, officers noticed that someone had thoroughly scrubbed the marble tiles with water, bleach, and a heavy floor squeegee push wiping the soapy, blood-tinted water into a tight corner drain near the bathroom. The killer had taken deliberate, methodical time after the murder to wash down the immediate crime scene, wiping away potential shoe prints, blood spatter, and touch DNA before casually locking the solid doors behind them and leaving. Detectives immediately launched an exhaustive investigation, searching for a motive. The victim was universally described as a pious, generous, and honest man with zero known enemies in the construction industry. His financial records were clean, his real estate dealings were entirely transparent, and he had no history of legal disputes. When officers reviewed his cell phone records, they discovered a curious detail. The contractor maintained an impeccably organized phone contact list. Every business associate, contractor, family member, and friend was meticulously saved under their full formal names, except for one specific phone number. Tucked deep inside his recent call logs was a mobile number saved only under a series of random, scrambled letters. A random mash of characters entered quickly into the keypad. Detectives pulled the detailed call detail records for that specific number, revealing a startling pattern. The contractor had been exchanging frequent, brief phone calls with this mystery number for several months. Most calls lasted only 20 to 30 seconds. Crucially, call tower data revealed that this mystery number had called the contractor's phone at precisely 4:30 on the afternoon of the murder, just 30 minutes before he arrived at the rural villa. Furthermore, the signal from that mystery phone mapped directly to the cell tower covering the villa. At the exact estimated time of the homicide, detectives submitted an urgent legal request to trace the official subscriber identity of the mystery SIM card. When the telecom data returned, it revealed that the SIM card was registered to a 28-year-old woman living in a nearby urban district. Gendarmes moved quietly, locating the woman at her residence and bringing her in for formal questioning. At first, the young woman appeared terrified, but under gentle, precise questioning, she broke down and revealed a secret double life that the contractor had kept completely hidden from his family. She confessed that she had been involved in a discreet, long-term affair with the wealthy contractor. He had used the secluded rural villa as their private meeting place. Away from his family and business life, she explained that on the afternoon of the murder, she had called him to arrange a meeting at the villa. However, she swore on her life that she did not kill him. She stated that while she was at the villa with him earlier that evening, an unexpected visitor arrived. She explained that a 35-year-old male relative of hers, a man with a heavy criminal record, who had recently learned about her secret relationship with the wealthy contractor, had followed them to the property. The male relative had knocked on the door, demanding a large sum of money from the elderly contractor, under the threat of exposing the affair to his wife, his daughters, and his business partners. When the noble contractor proudly refused to be blackmailed, an explosive physical confrontation erupted. The male relative drew a concealed knife, brutally attacking the contractor in the second-floor living room, while the terrified woman hid in the adjoining room. After the contractor collapsed, the killer forced the woman to help him clean the room. grabbing household bleach and detergents from the kitchen, frantically scrubbing the marble floors to destroy any biological evidence and shoe prints. Once the floor was washed, the killer locked the doors, confiscated the woman's phone, and forced her to leave with him in silence. Armed with her full confession, tactical team units raided the home of the 35-year-old male relative, arresting him without incident. During a search of his residence, officers recovered the hidden murder weapon, a heavy, blood-stained hunting knife tucked behind a loose wall panel, along with clothing soaked in bleach residue. Confronted with the forensic evidence and his relative's detailed statement, the killer confessed to the extortion attempt and the subsequent murder. He was formally charged with premeditated homicide, blackmail, and destruction of evidence, subsequently tried and sentenced to life in prison, bringing a quiet, somber closure to a tragic double life buried deep within the countryside. And with that, we reach the end of tonight's long journey through these quiet Maghreb cases, three vastly different stories, bound together by the fragile nature of human choices, hidden secrets, and the quiet work of justice that eventually brings the truth into the light. I hope these detailed accounts brought you a sense of calm, quiet intrigue, and peaceful distraction tonight. As always, make sure you are warm, comfortable, and completely relaxed. Let the quiet air of the night settle around you. Close your eyes, take a slow, deep breath, and rest easy. Thank you for listening to Quiet Maghreb Crimes. Wishing you a peaceful, quiet, and deeply restful sleep. Good night.